Welcome to Got Grass, conversations with the legends and leaders of bluegrass. You've enjoyed live bluegrass at Guitar Town CT concerts in Hampton, Connecticut since 2008. From Tony Rice, Rouse Stanley, and Doyle Lawson to Tim O'Brien, Sierra Hall, and Billy Strings. Now you can go behind the scenes as we chat with your favorite bluegrass stars. I'm your podcast host, Chris Worth. So I want to welcome Darol Anger to Got Grass. Welcome. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris. It's great to be here with the grass. Yeah.
I remember the first time we met actually was just about 5 years ago, and I was having a concert here in the middle of COVID with Joe Walsh and Grant Gordy outside, and all of a sudden this vehicle shows up pulling a trailer parked across the street. I go, that's unusual on my street. And then some guy got out carrying an instrument case. They said, that's even more unusual on my street. And then you came to the gate and you walked in with your fiddle case, and I realized it was you. And so that's really more unusual on my street. So that was just about exactly 5 years ago.
Man, yeah. It's hard to believe it's been that long. But yeah. I was on my way to somewhere with a trailer full of instruments. Yeah, probably that was what was going on at that point. Hard to remember exactly. You know what I was doing? I was actually making a record up in Maine with Ethan. Which Ethan was it? Setiowan. You've got a couple of Ethans with multisyllabic names. Ethan Yojevitz and Ethan Setiowan, and it was Mr. Setiowan. He played beautifully. Yep. So I had all this stuff with me. And of course, I was living in the trailer part of the time because, you didn't want to stay at a hotel.
Yeah, those were hard to believe, those times now. That was pretty crazy. So anyway, you're a pretty busy guy. What does a perfect day off look like for you? Do you ever get one?
Oh, yeah. Occasionally that does happen. It's actually, I expect to have a whole bunch of days off, but a whole bunch of stuff came in at the last minute. So I do, this constitutes a day off, and then tomorrow, and then I'm off on a tour with Bruce Smolsky. We'll be in Ohio and Pennsylvania. But perfect day off would be, sleeping late, maybe getting an idea, a musical idea that I can jot down somewhere. I can just reach over and grab a pencil and paper and write it down. Still in bed, just like Duke Ellington. Duke Ellington used to do most of his work in bed, from around 10 a.m. to about 3 p.m. Then he'd get out of bed. Yeah. And maybe a chance to just listen to music I love and play along with it and work on some crazy little tiny aspect of fiddle playing. Just spend, maybe 45 minutes just playing like 3 or 4 notes or something like that over and over again until I get them the way I want them.
It's funny because I have mostly bluegrass people on this podcast, obviously, and about half of them say, a perfect day off, I have my instrument, I'm playing music, and I say, well, do you have a day off without music? They go, no. The other half are usually fishing. And that's the other big thing. They like to go fishing. So it's split into 2 camps.
Yeah, the fishers, and the compulsive pickers. Yeah. Well, the fiddle particularly, I don't know. We've got a big divide between the fretted instruments and the fretless instruments. I think that I love guitar and mandolin myself. I've developed a really deep appreciation for instruments with frets after having played a fretless instrument for now. I guess I just ticked over to 60 years of like pretty serious playing. So that's in itself is kind of kind of upsetting, a little shocking. Because, and I think that this is a universal thing. I've noticed that I should be a lot better for how long I've been playing. I think if you just ask just about any serious musician, they'd say that. But
I've heard that. I often ask people what they're working on or what they feel like they're having a hard time with. I was talking to Michael Cleveland on a podcast. I said, what's hard for you? He goes, oh my God, playing in tune and double stops are just still impossible for me. I just never feel like I get them right. And I said, wow, that's hard to believe, but
Wow. That guy's ears are so developed. He's hearing things that most of us don't even, notice probably. Yeah, he's definitely the gold standard for most of us fiddle players at this point, guys. So, there's a guy that really, man, he comes across as so just completely unfiltered and just, everything pours out of him. But, he works just as hard, if not harder than the rest of us, and probably sweats over details that, like, as I said, most of us never even notice. And in that sense, I see this, I'm looking at your back wall there. I've seen a big poster for the Tony Rice unit. I'm thinking about Tony a little bit there, and just also somebody who was a real sweater over details and would really agonize over things. Some would say a little bit troubled, but the things he came up with, moved guitar playing forward so far. Just such an amazing guy, and he suffered. He suffered for his art.
It's funny because actually that was the first concert we ever had here, and he played here 4 different times, and he was kind of my hero. But for a guy who was obsessed with details, he was not obsessed with sound checks or set lists. I know that. He would never do the sound check, and he'd come on, and the first time he'd get up to the mic with his guitar, it would be feedback all over the place, and I was like, ah.
Yeah.
But I guess that was just him.
Yeah, that's interesting. That seems to be like kind of a point of pride among jazz players for sure. Tony was definitely had a jazz aesthetic. Everything's supposed to be just perfect because I've made my shit perfect. Oops, pardon my French there.
That's okay. We're not G-rated here, so.
Okay, cool.
So where have you lived in your life? Do you live in Portland, Maine now, or?
Oh man, that was a very important part of my life. The year and a half I spent in Portland, Maine, but being born in the Pacific Northwest was a great thing. That's a very beautiful, very emotionally loaded part of the country, I think, for just about anybody who spent any time there. And that was good. That was a rich environment. And moved to at the age of 10, we moved to the New York City area, New Jersey. My dad was commuting into Manhattan, and that didn't last very long. That lasted about 2 years, but it was the years 63 and 64, which were pretty important years in both musical history and the history of this country. So that was interesting, being in such an intensely urban area during that time. And then we moved to Portland, Oregon, and that was also a short time period. And then I spent over just about 30 years in the San Francisco Bay Area from 1967 to 2007. That adds up. Is that 40 years? I don't know, something like that. Anyway, so that, the San Francisco Bay Area was really a great situation then, especially starting in 1967, because there was so much going on musically. And, of course, that was my area of interest. So, a lot of things happened for me there. Particularly, I think the things that might be relevant for the listeners would be, getting me started the David Grisman Quintet with David and Tony, and then the rise of the Windham Hill community, which definitely was a musical community, and then, of course, the Turtle Island String Quartet, and just a few other things. But I think those would be like, I consider them like the high points of the career, and then the Bay Area got, like many other artists, I kind of left the Bay Area because it was getting really expensive and crowded and kind of crazy, and moved to Portland, Oregon for a very short time, and then back to Portland, Maine. And then that was a very serious life change for me. And then down to Boston, where I became a professor at the string department at Berklee College of Music, and that was very also another real high point. 10-year high point of interacting with all these incredibly intelligent people in the Boston area, and having this steady stream of brilliant young musicians, working with them and trying not to mess them up. I think that the Hippocratic Oath really applied there, and it was definitely on the minds of all of us in the string department, all the professors there. First, do no harm, and I think I'm mostly successful there, and that kind of leads us into the. I think what the latest effort of mine, the recorded thing, which is sort of is kind of valedictory, I guess, in the sense that I could probably quit recording. I could say this is my best work is the result of these incredible young musicians. These duets. This is how we do it. This is what we do, and everyone hopefully will benefit from this.
Uh-huh. Do you like the duet format? That's my favorite musical format. I mean, I love bands, but when I see two people on stage playing together, to me, that's the perfect balance of everything.
Yeah, that's
when it's
great.
good.
Yeah, and it's a great house concert situation too. The conversation is so clear, right? There's no, one of the great things about music is that if you do have a band, everyone, it's a conversation also, and everybody can talk at once, which is sort of, you can't do that in like regular language, but you can do it in band. But the duet format, right? It just clarifies, one person and the other person. We're making something together. We're talking. We're commenting. We're supporting. We're challenging. All these things that can happen, and it's very clear. I think it's easier to follow, for a listener for sure. And I've been doing it for so long, hooking up with Mike Marshall, who is just such a kindred spirit, and somebody who we've been playing together now for 45, 46 years, and that's so I'm very used to the duet format, and kind of have evolved a whole bunch of techniques and ways of playing the instrument to that work in a duet format. Playing in the I often talk about this. When I actually played in my middle school and high school orchestras for a couple of years, and I was not the most ambitious or virtuosic violinist back then, and so I usually get I was in blast chair, second violins in the orchestra. One cool thing about that is the second violinists, they never get the melody. They are always playing these support roles, and sometimes incredibly boring, but sometimes pretty interesting counterpoint, things that go along with the melody, that support the melody. And so that aesthetic, that kind of way of thinking about music, I got trained, to some extent with that. And so, I'm always more comfortable as a kind of an ensemble player, and that I think that stood me a good stead with David's group. I wasn't just waiting around to play the melody, and especially since David was mostly playing the melody, we do these, and a lot of times we pop the melody out by playing two instruments in unison. But just looking for textures and ways to support whatever was going on in front, was a big deal for me. So that became it made it easier for me to kind of play duets, because trying to how do you back up a guitar player on the fiddle, right? You've got to get under him, you got to get behind him, play something that hopefully we're playing music that's got tons of rhythm, it's got groove, it's really you can't just lay around and play long notes all the time. You got to move things forward, And of course, playing with David and Tony was that was, man, that was like college. That was PhD material for me as far as groove. So that, yeah, that all those things contributed. And so I consider yeah, duet playing is something that I kind of feel like I know how to do most of the time.
Yeah, I would imagine that also just as you say, playing rhythm on the fiddle, the chop as they call it, different rhythmic patterns behind another fiddler or a guitar player or somebody you're playing with becomes crucial because without it, you're like you say, just droning and it's kind of like boring.
Yeah, yeah, and then of course there's ways to do it without the chop. And of course, after doing the chop for so long, I'm really spending a lot of time trying to find ways. Like, okay, what can I just not chop? So, but so yeah, there's this whole spectrum of things that you can do that involve a rhythm. They can involve the chop, and then you just kind of there's this fading spectrum of things that you can do all the way from just pure rhythm, no notes at all, the chop with notes, then like bow patterns like shuffles, things like that. That's what we call, bow rhythms in fiddling that, involve a lot of notes, but they're like a rhythm pattern. And then you might have some kind of thing that combines to that. And then all the way down to a long note, or a drone, over chord changes where you're just playing one note over each chord. So if all those things get mixed together in the context of the story of the song, you've got something that can really keep people's interest and attention, and actually even maybe cause them to feel something, which is the ultimate great thing.
I had Richard Greene was on the podcast a while back, who I guess kind of invented the chop, right?
Yeah.
He was talking about his fiddle playing life. He grew up playing classical music, and he just was bored with it, and he hated practicing. And then he said he heard Scotty Stoneman play, and it just blew his mind. And that was his entree into like real music. He said after that, I couldn't play any more high fits. I was just floored by Scotty Stone. Did you have a moment like that when you like heard somebody that just kind of blew your mind musically?
Well, very, like ironically, but maybe not. Just the moment my mind was blown and I discovered fiddling was going to a concert of C Train with Richard Greene playing electric violin, playing Orange Blossom Special and Sally Gooden, and just soloing like a madman over all this, pop and rock music, and just playing so much. So Richard was sort of filled the Scott Stoneman space for me. It's like a very strong echo of Richard's experience, I think, and the things that moved Richard about Scott Stoneman's playing were the same thing that moved me about Richard's playing. And of course, somehow I don't know really, I didn't know anything about fiddling. I just I was into electric guitar. I was into Eric Clapton, all this stuff. I mean, that demographic. Eric Clapton was actually playing great stuff, and violin was like, they were just on two opposite corners of the musical world. But Richard he just combined everything. He just slammed everything together and go. It was like a moment that changed my life completely. And
yeah.
I think I'm always grateful to Richard for that. And, that's oddly, somehow, and I don't even know how I did this because there was really not a lot of, nobody was interviewing Richard at that point. There was nothing, I think the next fiddle player I heard was Scott Stoneman. And so, hearing Richard and then Scott, I thought, oh, okay, this is fiddling, which was cool because really, what Scott was doing was just that kind of shredding that the electric guitar players were doing at the same time. It was really, it was just fiddle style shredding, which was not that far away from electric guitar shredding.
Yeah, I'm always struck by listening to Bill Monroe and especially Bill Monroe, his approach to melody and rhythm. I was if you plugged him into electric amp, he would have been Jimmy Page. He was just all the rock guys basically were copying Bill Monroe riffs on electric guitar.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, amazing. That those two instruments, tuned kind of opposite each other, would be capable. I just think about Chuck Berry and that that the open fourths, right? That kind of like just in your face interval. If I could sing an open fourth, I would. But that's what we're talking about, right? That kind of. Well, I can do it. Tell you what, here.
Hey, folks, you're going to have a little treat here.
I'm going for it.
He's getting his fiddle out.
The technology. Right? That sound. Right? Right? That's Chuck Berry. But Bill Monroe happened before.
Yeah. You don't have to stop if you don't want to. That sounds. I actually have never had live music on the podcast. That's kind of cool to hear you play.
Okay, well,
whatever. Maybe later something comes up.
That's all we get
Thank
for
you.
now. But
yeah,
that you can't. Yeah, that's the sound, right? That's the sound of rock and roll. It's the sound of bluegrass. It's the sound of the American. And really, when I think about like old time music and stuff, and the rhythms of that, and so much of that is about. It's kind of about horses, and stuff like that. But bluegrass is kind of the sound of machine. It's the sound of, like, if you really think about it, like, what is the sound? It's a table saw, like the wood hits the table saw. Right? You put the slab of wood in there and the table saw, and it kind of slows down for a second. It's so there's a mechanized quality. That bluegrass is reflecting a certain kind of demographic of people that were operating dangerous machines. Certainly, the amount of driving those guys did was definitely certainly supports that theory, I think.
I never thought. I spent my life in construction, running table saws and stuff, so I'm familiar with that concept. I never thought of it, but you're right. It's working guys who are playing music on their off time, and that's what their life was about, work, right?
Yeah, and I think that contributes a lot to the bluegrass aesthetic of craft. There's such a high level. And certainly Tony exemplifies that. All those guys. Just the craft. JD. Just that level of, you're just striving to make the music fit together, perfectly. And there's, and I think there's so many people in the trades that play bluegrass, and one of the things about that's plumbing and electricians. If you don't do your job correctly in those kind of jobs, people can die. Right? If you hook up your, the electricity wrong, somebody's going to put it in the light switch and they're going to get electrocuted. The house floods. If the plumbing's wrong, the roof falls in if you don't brace the house correctly. All this stuff, and I think that aesthetic, is a very important component of bluegrass music, and I think it really, it strengthens the whole community and just basic ethos of the music.
Yeah. I want to mention a couple of people that you've played with quite a bit and get your reaction. Just a couple of names. One is, of course, Joe K. Walsh, who I know you teach with and play with a lot. He's played here a lot. When that name comes up, what do you think of?
Oh, Joe, and I think of just somebody who is so solid, such a good friend, and if he's on your side, man, he's never gonna falter. He's just a very solid person and a very thoughtful and again, somebody whose musical aesthetic matches his personal aesthetic. He's just so. Takes so much care and is so prepared for everything, and it's such a thoughtful, composer and player. He's going to be right there in any situation. that you find him in. So, yeah, there's a lot of, I mean, I just feel like he's, a great friend, on top of being such a, brilliant mandolin player. Really, he's sort of combined a lot of the, if you think about the kind of Doyle Lawson, Tim O'Brien kind of way of playing the mandolin, which is kind of bright and kind of, there's a certain amount of chirpiness involved in that, and like a lot of like sort of forward brilliance, combining with like the solidity, of Monroe's thing. You really get Joe, in a way. It just, he's just completely, just it's super inventive, and his rhythm is always uplifting, right? So, yeah, I'm just so glad to get to be playing with him. I've been playing with him now for maybe 20 years in various combinations. Of course, this band, Mr. Sun, that we've had for 13 years now, is still going strong. We just cut another record. It's in the can. We're trying to decide when to release it, but we're thrilled about that. And then it's an ongoing relationship that I just feel so great about. And, hopefully Joe feels the same way.
I'm sure he does. You mentioned Tim O'Brien. I only asked this question because I took up mandolin last fall out of kind of necessity in a bluegrass classes I teach. I normally play guitar, and there was no mandolin player, so I took it up, and I love it. But I'm interested in Tim O'Brien's mandolin style because he seems to be a very unique player compared to the standard mandolin players who are all great and virtuosic and play all over the place. He has a very distinctive style. As soon as you hear one note, it's him. Could you just briefly, how would you define that style? Because I'm trying to kind of figure it out on the mandolin.
Tim's very, another really alive player. And I think that Joe got a lot of, that aesthetic of that kind of like sort of, forward kind of rhythm that's like sort of always, kind of pushing on the beat, but dancey way, there's a lot of groove. And when you watch Tim's left hand, it looks like he's just not even moving his fingers at all.
That's what I'm wondering about, because it looks like he's not really playing anything on his left hand, yet he's playing all this stuff. But that's a good, dancing is a good word to describe the style of his, because he kind of dances around very rhythmically, but playing these kind of weird two-finger chords and things that aren't really mandolin. It's just, I don't know. I enjoy watching him, trying to figure out what the heck he's doing.
Yeah, I think, I did ask Tim about that at one point, and I go like, man, it's just like, it looks like you're not moving at all. And he said, well, early on, and it happens no matter what instrument he's playing with the fiddle, and of course it contributes to his incredible accuracy on fiddle, because, this guy, he's playing like at least three instruments. Well, four if you count the octave mandolin. So great. How do you have time to even play that stuff? That to keep up on all the instruments. Well, I did decide early on that I needed to not, just to move as little as possible. Tim is the kind of guy that, he just, if he doesn't have to move, he doesn't. He's very, low key in that way, and then everything comes out. He's singing like he's one of the greatest singers ever, and I think that kind of economy of motion thing was a big deal for him, and he just developed that, and so that helps him, maintain this consistency across all these instruments as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. There's a young guy that you've played with, I know, who happens to be, he's performing here in my house next week from tonight, Ben Garnett, guitar player, who I find fascinating because, he has this bluegrass thing with Missy Raines, but his own music is very, like yours, very wide ranging, and it's not in any kind of pigeonhole. It goes anywhere.
Yeah, Ben. Yeah, Denton, Texas guy. He went to North Texas State down there, one of the big jazz schools, famous jazz schools. And they're thinking about Lyle Mays, people like that went there. Ben's a real, he's unique player, just very much himself, and quite charming guy. I really, it's been great to be, around in the area with him, and he, of course, he asked me to play on his last record, and that was fascinating because just all these great ideas, and he's able to articulate them in a way that it makes it kind of helps you get inside his crazy little world there.
Yeah. When you play with him or record or rehearse, are you going from sheet music score that he writes, or is it partially
it's
like
mostly
describing to you, or how does that work?
Yeah, it mostly starts with sheet music, which is a situation that I'm comfortable with. And then, and then we get to decide, together, like, okay, well, where do you leave this? Okay, this is a basis for, it's just, yeah. Like the first Ghostbusters movie. Okay, it's more of a guideline than a rule, right?
Right. Gotcha. I wanted to jump back in time a little bit when, because I know you played with David Grisman back in the West Coast in the 70s. How did, what were you doing when did he contact you and say, I'm starting a group, you want to join? Or what were you up to at the time
Wow.
you joined?
Well, the first time Richard, changed my life was with that rock group. But the second time Richard changed my life was with a group called the Great American Music Band, which was a group that did not record. But that was Richard and David playing a lot of David's original material with, kind of a changing cast of characters. I think Jerry Garcia played one gig with them, and Taj Mahal played bass with them for one gig. It's just like this one sort of a Bay Area kind of jammy band that was actually had some material, original material, and they were kind of developing that. So I saw that group, which actually was an all-instrumental group, and featured a fellow named John Carlini, also the great jazz guitar player, who helped arrange a lot of David's, that first tranche of David's material, original stuff, which, kind of developed into these symphonic arrangements, right? So I saw that group in 1974, and they called it the Great American Music Band because there was a very important venue in San Francisco called the Great American Music Hall, where a lot of these, just everybody would play there. I went to see Country Gazette, with Byron and Roland and Alan Mundy, and they were playing on a double bill with this Great American Music Band. So that was exciting for me. I always kind of, looking back, I always think it's funny that my I had three really huge influences, fiddle-wise, and one of them was Byron, and the other one was Richard, and you could not get two more different, fiddle players, and still play the same instrument than those two guys. They were, the only thing they had in common was that they both were tall. But, but I got to see that band, and the Great American Music Band was playing Richard and David, and they were playing a lot of David's, this original material that became the basis for the David Grisman Quintet. And what they're doing, it was an acoustic band. It blew my mind. Somehow, I'd gone to see, some of my favorite bluegrass, Country Gazette, and I wound up walking out of there going, I was born to play this music, this other music, this David's thing, and right after that, Great American Music Band disbanded because Richard got a gig with Loggins and Messina, and they couldn't make any money, and it was like people were living, pretty far away from each other, so it was like it wasn't a viable group, financially for anybody. So David was just, he didn't have a band right then, and he was between bands. He was teaching my friend Todd Phillips, who was, mostly known as a bass player, but really a great mandolin player too, went up and took mandolin lessons from David. I was about 100 miles south of where David was, up in Mill Valley, California. I was down in Santa Cruz, a beach town there. I just dropped out of college. My big career decision was to drop out of college to play bluegrass music in pizza parlors. But it did work out. And so Todd knew that I was really into David's music, which I had heard. I'd brought one of those shoebox cassette machines to the gig. Apparently, people didn't notice about that stuff back then, and I just had it sitting on the table, and I recorded the entire, Great American Music Band set, and I was so into it that I learned every song they played. I figured out the chords to most of it, and learned all the melodies, all the harmonies, and all of Richard's solos. I just memorized everything. And so when Todd, he knew I was really into this, like obsessed with this stuff. So when Todd started jamming with David on a regular basis, because Todd kind of learned everything that David kind of had to teach him on mandolin within a space of a couple of months. So then they just started playing. And Todd would just go up there and hang out with the bass player who had played in the same band, and David, and they'd play through the tunes and jam and have ideas and stuff and get high. And so one day Todd just said, well, why don't you just come up, because you actually know all this material. So it'll probably be fun for you and fun for David. And it was beyond fun. It was mind-blowing, and I got to play, and I knew all of David's tunes, and I could play Richard's solos, and I think that kind of charmed David. And he said, well, you don't have to play Richard's solo. Well, I know that, but Richard's the best, he's the best starting point, right? Because, Richard is Richard. And so that we just kept, getting together. I would just drive up there, and Todd and I would go up, and we'd just jam. And right around that time, just this, it feels like years, right? When you're young, early 20s, a month feels like a year, because you haven't lived that long. And so it felt like a long time, but I think it was only a matter of a few months. And then all of a sudden, David was making this Rounder record for Rounder, and he made a record with Bill Keith. So that's where he met Tony, I think, Tony Rice, and they really hit it off. And then David hired Tony and Bill Keith and Vassar Clements for his Rounder album. And he had, I think he recorded it, and I can't even remember where he recorded it, but he was gone for a couple of weeks, and he came back with these incredible tapes. And he said, hey, man, you got to hear this. You got to hear Vassar playing octave fiddle on this one thing and all this stuff. And it was the first time I'd ever heard roughs, like professional roughs on like a big, tape machine. And I'm going, man, this sounds like gods playing. It's Olympian. It's like these guys. It's incredible. It just got me so excited. And of course, I was a huge Vassar Clements fan at that point. Anyway, so that was just something that moved everything forward. And of course, that session, David convinced Tony that, well, somehow that Tony wanted to play this music. And then a few months later, it all just started coming together. And this is like year 50 for that. We're just about going out of that now. So that's it's an important thing, I think. It was a beautiful time. And
it's been wonderful for me, because I've got you. I had Richard Greene. I had Todd Phillips on the podcast, and David Grisman. So I've been hearing all the stories, kind of all meshing together from different points of view about the band and how Tony
got the
came out.
Rashomon thing. That's fun.
Yeah, it's been really fun and interesting to hear all this.
Cool.
Did you and I know Tony had a reputation for going out listening to jazz in his apartment all night long. Was that part of your thing too? You guys listened to a lot of jazz together?
Yeah. Oh yeah. We'd get in his car and we'd drive around and listen to Oscar Peterson and like jazz. Niels Henning and San Francisco was a great town. That was a big town, and people would come there. Stephen Grappelli would play there every 6 months. We saw Bill Evans. We saw McCoy Tyner, all at the Great American Music Hall, right? And this place where we played every 2 or 3 months, we'd play there. So we could just, half the time they just let us in. We'd get up in the balcony and we'd see these guys. There was another jazz club called the Keystone Corner, and we'd go to see Dexter Gordon there and Alvin Jones. Yeah, we were seriously trying to absorb that, and that aesthetic, and yeah, just kind of get into, just find like what's going on musically with these guys. It wasn't about the licks so much or the harmonic changes. It was about how these guys interacted musically with their other musicians on stage. And I think that was, that was the most valuable thing that I think we got out of that sense of like, challenge and freedom and, just pushing the limits, boundaries of whatever, arbitrary boundaries that you're setting yourself, initially, then you push on those or come at them from some other, direction.
Funny because I did mention Tony Rice was kind of my musical hero, one of them, I guess my main musical hero, but the other one was Oscar Peterson, and I know that was one of Tony's main guys.
Oh yeah.
And I got to see Oscar. I was a huge jazz fan growing up. I got to see Oscar Peterson actually after he had his stroke, so he was like half of Oscar Peterson. He was still the greatest pianist around in jazz, even at really half of his, he could still do it, but both those guys had that swing and that rhythm thing that, I mean, Oscar just would play three notes and was like, oh my God, this thing is just like killing.
Yeah. Yeah.
I always loved that.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. Yeah. I never saw him after, we saw him when he was like, that was unbelievable. Who was that? It was like Oscar Peterson, Niels, and Joe Jones, not Joe Jones, but the Philly Joe. Philly Joe. Like what? It was the most amazing. Yeah, you just can't get any better. It was so incredible, and of course we were all just Neil's fans. I think it was really, it was a rough gig for a bass player of the David Grisman Quintet because we were driving around going like, man, Niels, hey, can you play some Niels shit? This guy's like, oh no, and this was not, I mean, we were all putting ourselves up against, whatever, Tony was, he was really trying to, he was listening to Earl Klugh and Oscar and stuff. So he was measuring himself against guys of this caliber. Kenny Drew, also, kind of an Oscar Peterson influenced piano player from, who was living in Copenhagen at the time. Mm-hmm. And I was, and David was like bringing in all these guest fiddle players like Vassar and Ricky Skaggs, was playing a lot of fiddle with us. And these incredible, Richard would be in there all the time. So, it was really, the humilitron, but I think it was productive in that way because, you really, you just gave it something very concrete in your face to work toward.
Mm-hmm. There's some videos on YouTube, black and white, of Oscar Peterson Trio with Ed Thigpen and Ray Brown. And one of my favorites is the tune Sea Jam Blues, where Oscar starts off on the piano, then, and then when the drums come in, the bass, it's like, it just kills you. It's just, like you say, there's no better music ever written or played than that, I think.
Yeah, I have to agree with you there. It's just.
So did you? I mean, Tony famously or infamously, after his hand problems and whatever issues, kind of retired from music and became kind of a reclusive. And a lot of people who were friends with him couldn't stay friends with him because he wouldn't respond. Did you stay in touch with Tony Rice after he kind of?
No, not really. It was. I think there's also always I mean, there was always a level of. We were from very different worlds, very different upbringings. Tony was really, kind of got some real, I don't believe it was physical abuse, but definitely, some torture, from his family. His dad, especially, was kind of was a musician, and just, there's like, I think, just coming from real different backgrounds, we thought about music in different ways, and I think that we both were able to learn from each other to some extent, and respected each other like crazy. But it was difficult to really, there was always a point, where you just have to stop talking. But man, I think I loved him, and I believe that he had some good feelings toward me. Certainly, he knew that I kind of I more than respected him, and
yeah.
So and I think that occasionally, I mean, there are times when I think he felt free enough to just be silly, and just have these funny moments where he'd just be, kind of just free to just be, kind of act silly and stupid, and those were some really treasured moments, I think.
Yeah.
Just when we were just goofing around and being silly, and like musicians do.
Was there ever a point in your life where you kind of either were discouraged or whatever and considered doing something else? Like, I know musicians and artists have up and down times. Was there ever a point where you just felt like, well, I can't do this right now, or?
Well, yeah, the first 3 years of GGQ were definitely, just very difficult, struggling, years for me, because I was on, I was like I was 8 years younger than David, and I think like 3 years younger than Tony, something like that. And those guys had, made a reputation for themselves, and they had already, kind of established a sound. And I was definitely feeling like I was playing catch up, and I was comparing myself to Richard, of course, and trying to do this, trying to be at the level that these guys were at, because, we had to be, because that was the gig, right? And fiddle, is a tough instrument. Anyway, it's hard, when you start it. When you get in a few years, it's also hard. And then at the end, which I feel like I am now, it's very hard. So it's just one of those instruments that demands, a lot of technical consistency and perfection, and the bar is really high. It's higher now. Certainly with people like Rich Stewart and Michael Cleveland and Jason and all these guys just playing so perfectly, just beautifully, But I just felt like a lot of times I just felt like I wasn't keeping up, and my rhythm was okay, but just trying to get in tune and just trying to play, have a larger range of what I could express, trying to expand that. And I would call, and I know there was a period of about a year and a half where Tony was really, I think Tony would really have much rather have had Richard playing in the band at that point, somebody who was a little bit, a bit farther along. And I think Tony was, he was like, I mean, I don't think he was like actively trying to get me fired, but definitely, I could feel his, like, okay, oh God, can't this guy get it together? And it really weighed on me heavily. And I talked to David more than twice, like either talk to him on the phone or just be in a room going, hey man, I just, you should get somebody that could really play this stuff. And this is something that, I'll always love David for, to his credit, he's, if he feels like you're on his side, he is going to be the most loyal guy in the world. And he would always say, hey man, you understand this music, better than anybody. And you're in it for the right reasons. You're an improver. You're always improving. You're always looking for things to do. I'm sticking with you. So that, but those first 3 years, a little bit more, sometimes years with the quintet, for me, it was tough. I think that, and David found these quotes. He found a quote from Tony Williams and Bill Evans too. Both of those guys famously, said, Bill, the piano player, two jazz guys said, well, I would rather listen to somebody, who's struggling and kind of working on their thing rather than somebody who has it all together and it's all like some perfect thing, and that kind of encouragement was the thing I needed to keep going, and I credit David for that very much, and letting him let me, find my own way and get my own sound. And I probably had the most freedom in that group of anybody in a lot of ways, just because naturally a fiddle has more freedom because you're not expected to play grooves and rhythms and stuff like that. You're supposed to be floating around on top. Well, I was into playing the grooves and rhythms and trying to get the harmonic thing going and try to make a full sound behind Tony's solo, all that kind of stuff. And that sometimes that worked, sometimes it didn't.
Yeah. I know you have done and do a lot of teaching. So what advice would you give to a fiddle player who's just learning bluegrass fiddle? If you could give them one good piece of advice, what would you tell them? I mean, maybe not technique, just like something about how to approach it.
Well, you're playing a lot of different roles. It was the thing about with fiddling, it's like such an interesting bluegrass fiddling. You're a lead player. You play harmonies. You're playing a backup role. You're playing a support role. When the mandolin's playing a solo, you might be the guy that chops. So there's all these different. It's very. There's a lot of things going on. I think that you really need to know your musical structure. Your harmonics, harmonies. Find ways to spell out the chord progression. With the right notes that make sense.
It's funny because I play with fiddle players, and some of them have been classically trained, or whatever, and they don't think in terms of chords at all. A guitar player, you only think in terms of chords.
Right.
Fiddle player, like, what's a G chord? I don't even know what a G chord is. I just know these are the melody notes for whatever I play. So I find that interesting that their whole concept of music is not chord based at all, whereas as a guitar player or even mandolin, you're playing a lot of chords. And
it's ironic, really, because Western European art music is based on counterpoint and harmony. One of the kinds of music that's developed harmony and chord movement to its ultimate fullness. And yet, the thing about that Western European art classical violin thing is that. There's so much emphasis on just being a jukebox and just sort of reproducing somebody else's ideas. And so really, you don't need to know much about structure, supposedly, which people talk about theory, and I just call it structure because really what it is foundation of what we're doing. And so, you need to know that stuff. I think that's really important. And as somebody who started on guitar, I was lucky in that way because, I started with chords too. And I was always in the back of my mind, okay, what's the chord? And if you're improvising, man, you got to know.
What's the story with the 5-string fiddle? I know you play it. I know various famous people have played it through history and bluegrass. What is, I don't know much about it.
I didn't want the banjos to have all the fun.
There you go.
Right. Yeah, no, it's, especially in duet playing, right? You're trying to get under people, you're trying to get some foundation, harmonic foundation as well as rhythmic foundation. So with a 5-string, basically you've got a viola string, right? So you have a low C that goes below the G. So you just have that much more low stuff, I mean, nobody wants to hear somebody backing up that's not backup. That's that's obfuscation, it's just so great, if you're in D, with the, and you've probably found this with the mandolin, right? It only goes down to G, right? If you have a D note, I mean, And even with guitar, if you want a low D, you have to tune it down. You have to tune the E string down. Well, with fiddle, if you're playing in D, you don't get a low D. You get an A, which is sort of like, okay, that's okay, that'll work. But man, if you have that C string, you can play a D below the mandolin player, and and an E, you got a D and an E, and what we're calling the bass of the instrument. It's not really that. It's still not that deep, but it's at least you get like this expanded range downward that gives you a lot more, just richness, and basis for playing a stronger harmonic, more. And in this case, more is more, right? Another string actually adds, a lot of harmonic, possibilities and richness. So,
do you play the 5-string fiddle when you're just by yourself fooling around, or do you only play it on certain required gigs, or how does that work?
Man, I just, if I have to play a 4-string for whatever reason, it's just, I'm always reaching for that low string.
Oh.
I have 3 really great 5-strings. Finally, it took me a while to find one. When I was playing with Brittany Haas, Brittany came in, I think she came into my life at about 14 years old, and she had just gotten one of those Silikowski 5-strings, which is the guy that really sort of established a sound for the instrument. This was Bobby Hicks had his for quite a few years before that, but they were just so rare because people were trying to figure out how to make them sound good. Now we've got this whole explosion of interest, and people are really have figured out ways to, make a consistently good sounding 5-string violin. It's but at that point it was hard to find a good one. So it took me a few years to find something good, but now I have 3 great ones, and I just I only keep a 4-string instrument for when I'm teaching. If I'm showing somebody something, and if I'm playing, the G string, but it looks like the D string. It looks like a different string. It can be very confusing to people who are trying to copy what you're doing. So I'll usually stick with the 4-string when I'm teaching.
Brittany Haas was one of the people I was going to ask you about, because she's never played here. I've always loved her music, but it seems like when she's in a setting, a duo or a band, as soon as she starts playing, the energy and drive level just goes up 100%. She just has that, I don't know what it is. How would you describe it? Just brings a certain something.
She just can completely drive a band. One of those. Preternatural, I guess, is a good word for that. Not exactly superhuman, but definitely beyond what you think human capability. I put her in that. Same thing, same feeling I got when I first heard Tony Rice. Right? It's like, oh, humans shouldn't be able to do this. This is like beyond. Something. Same thing when you hear somebody like Sierra Farrell sing or something like that, right? It's that like, whoa, this is beyond natural capabilities. There's something going on here that's beyond, and something that she always had a kind of accuracy, but after working with her for quite a few years, just off and on, and then hiring her in the band, I think that she's been able to absorb from so many different directions. The great Alistair Fraser, a great Celtic fiddle player, Bruce Smolsky, of course, who also had quality in old time music. You hear old Bruce and go like a lot. There's these people that sort of make certain kinds of music sound as good as it is. There's that famous joke that old time music is better than it sounds, and pop music sounds better than it is, and all that kind of thing. And so, but there's people that sort of bring things up. Like Mark O'Connor made Texas fiddling sound as good as it is, and Bruce made old time fiddling sound as good as it is, right? And Brittany was around Bruce. In fact, Bruce brought Brittany to me. He said, "I ran out of stuff. I can't teach her anymore. She's just, you please, help me out here." And so, yeah. And of course, Brittany's sister Natalie, they've been around each other since they were, very, very small, tiny, like small, like.
Yeah.
So, yeah, she's been around people that are playing. When I play, I put everything I got into it. And I'm still sort of, I kind of have this human sound, but. I think that, the aesthetic was there for her always. It's like, okay, you're going to deliver the goods, right? In fact, let's just put everything we got into it, and that, we did a lot of duet playing and just being able to just go at, just when you have a thing where you can just go, and I wish, where it's just, it's like, it was like atom smashing or something. There's this kind of, it's like a sword fight. Like a great, like if you find fencing. Like this great sword fight. Right? It's not a fight, but it's a thing. It's like a choreographed Hollywood sword fight. With really good swords people. And that's just the coolest thing. And when you're bouncing off somebody rhythmically like that, and it's like Natalie McMaster had the same thing. Just there's these people that you just bounce off of, and you just keep coming at them, and they'll just bounce off, and you'll just keep going. It's just the most exciting thing, in the world, and it's. I think Brittany was around that all the time, and she not only picked up on it, she took it to a whole new level. Everybody wants to play Brittany with Brittany because she's so. She'll just get in there, whatever you're doing, she'll just elevate it, escalate it, and that's, I think that's, something I picked up from both David and Tony, and I think maybe I was able to pass that on in some way, and that's kind of what I feel with this new record, the Diary Fiddler record, is that all the people that I played with on that record are people that. I worked with in some capacity, some, different, some people I worked with for a couple of years, as kind of a mentor, and then other people I would just be hanging around with, and we just, I might have some piece of musical advice, some tiny little thing that they picked up on and liked, but people that. Just about everybody on the record knows each other. It's definitely a cohort. And Kurt Vonnegut's word, it's a chorus. It's a group of people that are connected, and in lots of different ways. And you can kind of feel this kind of aesthetic, and it's this sort of shared joy, of what we do. So, in that sense, it's like a big, it's kind of a one by one, kind of a family reunion, except for that one cut where everybody's on it. Amazing.
Yeah. It's funny you mentioned that because I've talked to a lot of people that have played with Tony Rice, among other people, and they always said when you played with him, the music just was elevated and everyone played. I always say the best they ever played in their lives was when they played with him. A lot of these players that are fantastic and still are, but I feel like the stuff they did together, whatever the energy was, it just was the best.
Yeah. I think you can draw a line there, between somebody like Tony, and certainly David had that too, and I think Tony and David's playing together was especially those first 2 or 3 years, when they were really kind of in love with each other's way of doing things, man, it was just like being in the center of a hurricane or a tornado or something like that. It was really incredible. Just some of the most amazing.
Here's a reflective question: if you could have sat down and played music with anybody in music history, just sat down and played a little duet jam on the couch or something. With anybody that you would have liked to have played with that didn't get a chance to, or?
Oh yeah, actually, well, yeah, and funny, really not that far away from, I would think that I would have loved to, played, on some kind of regular basis with Ry Cooder, who was such a huge influence for me, just, I would listen to his stuff obsessively. And of course, he's still with us, but I think he's not playing a lot these days. But yeah, I think he really set a bar for all kinds of playing.
It's funny. I would have thought you two would have sometime gotten together. I don't know why.
Yeah, I mean, you would. I mean, I would have maybe if I'd been a little bit more adamant. And Northern California and Southern California are like two different, universes almost. It's very weird. It's the same state, but it's two different places. I just, yeah, it's interesting. How that, just, just an interesting kind of just one of these anomalous things. I did get to play with David Lindley, who, was a blast. Such a funny guy, so deep, and really, really amazing player. Yeah. So, it just never quite, you just one of those things, you miss each other and you never quite get there.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think Ry's particularly into fiddle anyway. So.
Yeah. So what's on your agenda or bucket list for the next couple of years? You're going to just keep on pursuing more recording and teaching and performing? Do you have anything special that you're
I feel
aiming
like
for?
that's funny since I retired from Berkeley, and so I kind of have this vibe for myself that I'm sort of semi-retired and I'm not really making calls. I'm just taking calls. But of course, I do have Mr. Sun, and I'm still kind of this Diary of Fiddler sequel has been to me that's sort of has completed a cycle, and I'm sort of thinking, well, okay, I mean, I don't have anything that's driving me right now. I do have a couple of ideas for projects that I'd like to do. And it's sort of are based on the condition of my playing at this point, which is not, I think technically the peak of my violin playing was probably in like the early 2000s or something like that. And I listened to stuff that I did back then, and it was like pretty. I think I was definitely in that place where I could just about play just about anything I wanted, and could be pretty scary, kind of that kind of like exciting thing that we've been just talking about, right? That sort of preternatural. That did happen for a couple of years for me, and now at this point it's like I'm like those older baseball pitchers, like they don't really pitchers, like they don't have like the fastball anymore. But they got a great spitball and a great slider, and like the curveball is really, knuckleballs happening. I can do a lot of, I've been really studying singers, people like Marvin Gaye and Bonnie Raitt, and looking at that kind of nuance, and just those kind of, just going more for melody and detail, And I think I could make a really cool sort of record of great melodies, like like a pop, like Leon Russell wrote some great songs, right? Stuff like that, Great, just find the greatest melodies and just find a band to play them with me, and just make it, and then just have a good time doing that. But yeah, at this point, it's just all about the fun. I think I just want to have some fun. I'm living in Nashville. It's full of great musicians. So hopefully, I'll be able to keep working with Mr. Sun, because that's the level of communication that band is off the charts at this point.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like, wow, well, if there was a statement to be made, I just did that. So that's cool.
I just happened to watch a documentary on Wayne Shorter. It's a 3-part, and I think Brad Pitt was involved in producing it. But I was always a huge fan of his playing. But you listen to his playing. I mean, he sometimes would play 4 notes in 3 minutes. I mean, he wasn't concerned anymore with playing everything. He just wanted to play something, whatever it was, rhythmic, melodic, or new. And it was an interesting way of, you'd sit there, watch him play. He'd just sit there and listen to the band. He'd look at them, and then maybe he'd play a little something. They'd look at them like, "Come on, guys." It was fascinating to me to watch him. These tapes of him live, just how he listened and didn't really play all that much. So
he definitely didn't have anything left to prove, right? It was more just like, okay, what works here? What fits? Where's the music? Oh, okay. Well, sounds like that note is not. If nobody's going to do that note but me, so I should do that one. But if it's not needed, it's not going to go in there. That's a beautiful attitude, and I'm hoping that sometimes I feel that way, and sometimes I don't. And I would like to feel that way all the time. That's a beautiful way of doing it.
Is there anything that I should have asked you that I didn't ask you as we wind down here?
Chris, I think that the questions are great. I felt like I really kind of hit pretty much hit the meat of some stuff. So I think that's I can't think of anything I want to say in addition, but it was really fun kind of going down memory lane here with you and talking about some of our favorite people, favorite musicians. So, thank you for the great conversation.
Well, thank you. I thoroughly enjoyed it, and maybe I'll see you again live sometime at some point down the road.
I hope so.
And I'll send you a link to this podcast if you want to listen to it at some point.
Thanks. That's great, Chris. Right. Yeah, I want to hear some of these other conversations. I got to go back. I want to hear what Richard Greene has to say.
They're all fun and interesting. Yeah. Okay. Well, thanks again for being on, Darol. We'll talk to you soon.
It's been a pleasure. All right. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
I hope you enjoyed our podcast, and thanks for listening. Visit our website, guitartownct.com, for concert and podcast schedules, or just to send us a message. We'd love to hear from you.